The United States has taken a slight dip recently, but over throughout the world, I believe the lifespan of people are longer, the amount of famine is less, even today.
I haven't seen statistics, but I tend to agree with you. I think the question is a little bit bigger, and I think we're on air right now. So let me sort of introduce what it is we've been talking about. Steve had asked the question: is society meeting the needs of the people? Like, I use the term society because a number of the needs that he had identified, and maybe it'd be better if he speaks for himself, but including things like feeling a human attachment, a personal attachment to others, which is not really what the government does. It may like to, but it's just not capable of it. So that's kind of what we're talking about. And then Steve and Chuck had read a book, which they were just speaking about, talking about, and why don't I do this? Why don't I turn it over to Steve so he can describe a little bit better what the book is, so everybody's kind of on the same page.
I have not had time to look at my archives to see what the book title was, but it came out several years ago. And the thesis of the book was simply that the world is better off than it had ever been before in recorded history. That while we tend to dwell on mishaps and horrible events, and that may be the fault of the news media, we get riveted on disasters. But when it comes down to it, the human race is really much better, and the metrics for being better were over a wide variety of different aspects. One of them was that the average life expectancy of the world had never been higher at the time of the writing of the book, which I think was several years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. That the average income of people in the world has never been higher. That the number of people who are killed in wars has never been smaller than in this part of the 21st century. And so the conclusion from this book, and I was very happy to read that conclusion, was that we tend to be very pessimistic when we see the news, but in truth, life is really better for most of us. Okay, well, that was the book, and I'll see if I can come up with a title. It was written by, I believe, someone from the Netherlands after a good deal of research. But that was several years ago, and it was definitely pre-COVID. And so I am wondering, is that still true?
Well, I bring up a fact that is interesting, because when you were originally talking about it, you were talking about all the human needs. Throughout Europe, and certainly in China, there is a rise in autocracy. People are voting to elect and put into political power those who want to reverse the direction of society. So the interesting thing is, if all the statistics say, hey, things are going well, things are going as well as they've ever gone, why is it that large segments of populations, east, west, north, south, are moving towards a more trying to reverse some of the things that are happening. Now, I can tell you the specifics of what's happening that tend to be cited, like, for example, immigration, things like that. The changes to the way we see our countries. For example, Black Lives Matter, where a population that has certainly not been, that is not equal in economic and political benefits to the existing power structure, is demanding that they get their share, and this is causing people to say no. I want to go back to the way things were. Not so much. I don't know that all of them are saying, oh, I don't want these others involved in my life, and things were better 20, 30, 50 years ago when they knew their place. But even if my needs are being met, does that mean that the other people, the rest of society, is having their needs being met? So I'm questioning what this guy's conclusions are.
Well, I think things can always, for the most part, can always be better. There's things that always need to be, for the most part, need to be worked on. So it's I don't know if it would ever get to the point where everybody in every country in the world is going to be 100% satisfied. So it's always going to be an ongoing struggle. Has Oman got something to say here?
Thank you for that. I was listening to the dialogue and the discussion. My premise for whole world is that there is no matter what we do, inequality is built in the way humans operate. And the inequality could be because the way we behave, or worse, it could be thrust upon us. When it is thrust upon us and we resent it. Now, there have been efforts actually over the last 50 years or so to try to level the playing field by providing affirmative action. And that itself has, of course, provided opportunities for people like me or other people like me. But at the same time, I see that I understand there is a growing resentment against that, because the idea is that we are stealing somebody else's position. I also look back at India, where they actually, in 1947, when India became independent, first thing they did is they introduced affirmative action. And so over the years, everybody says, oh, this guy came in to the medical school because he or she belongs to X, Y, and Z group. And over time, they said, oh, this guy must be a third-rate guy. That's why he got in. And over time, it has built up so much resentment that political parties covertly are running their election campaigns based on the premise that you are dissatisfied and we will make it better. And so people vote for those people, and they have become authoritative, going back to what Bob said.
Oman, were you born in this country?
No, I was not born in this country. No.
What year did you come to this country?
I came in 76.
Okay. do you feel this country is better? I'm assuming you came from India.
Yes, I came from India.
Do you think this country is in better shape than India is? Did you or your parents come to this country for something better?
Yes, actually, I mean, this whole promise of United States is better opportunities, better outcomes when you put the elbow grease in. And so there is always opportunity, no matter what. That's a premise that we come with. But then the question is, when you have this built-in resentment, as I gave you the example of India, there also I saw the same thing, that you would hear this from people saying, well, these people are taking our jobs, meaning the ones who were assigned the affirmative action. And so they are taking the jobs, they are doing these things. So over time, after I came here, I saw and know now that there was built-in resentment being not only felt, but also propagated by and fomented by the political parties for their own gain. And so anybody who did this affirmative action are now considered to be the ones who really created divisions in the society, who really created problems for the society. And so the finger pointing goes on. But in the meantime, what happens is larger and larger sections of people want to go back to those good old days, which is sad, because those were not good old days. They were under British rule. See, this is kind of an anomalous way we think, but that's what human behavior is. The same thing I see here, that there is affirmative action, there is opportunity to provide equal, the effort is to provide equal opportunity. The only problem is we can't guarantee equal outcomes. That is the problem.
I think Steve had something to say.
I was just going to inject a little note here. When we talk about extreme nationalistic governments like the Modi government in India, and I think we talk about people being very unhappy, and in return electing a government that takes advantage of this unhappiness. And number one, I inquire whether or not people in these countries really like these governments. I mean, whether this is really an aspiration of theirs to have the Modi as the head of state, or did they just settle upon him because he's arousing certain emotions? But I think it's pointing out that people's needs are not being met.
That's true
Today. And when I was talking about this survey of world conditions a few minutes ago, we were talking about life expectancy and economic level and health. One thing I did not get around to mentioning was, are people happier?
Right.
And that was not talked about in the book. And I would hazard a guess that people are very unhappy now compared to how they were at other times. And I'm wondering, what can we do about this? Is this something that the governments can do, or is this the responsibility of the individuals? Should it be left to churches or civic organizations or mental health people? I'm sort of wondering about whether people are really happier.
I kind of think in terms of happiness that I think a lot of people just fantasize backwards on what their life used to be like, how simple their life used to be. I think if you're talking about teenagers nowadays, they don't have that far to look back. So I think as we get older, we have these images of many years ago that were simpler, as I said. How do you think, Bob?
Uh, Listening to the conversation, I was reminded of something. My daughter was having a conversation about a year ago, and she started taking a poll of the people in the room. What is your goal in life? What do you want? And people were talking about they want this specific thing or that specific thing or more money or whatever. And I realized my goal in life is to be content. And as a result, I think I'm, based on our conversation, I'm one of the few who is, quote, happy. I don't know what happy means, but to me, seeing, number one, my life as it is now, and B, how I see it evolving over time. Admittedly, at my age, there may be a lot less time left than some others, but I see myself as relatively content, and I wonder if that's kind of the goal that we should be able to pass on to our kids.
I want to comment on the fact that the four of us are all fairly close to the same age, give or take a few years. So it's a different perspective, I think, on life at this point in my time.
Right.
And I know I can vision that I have a somewhat limited amount of time left versus when I was in my 20s or 30s or 40s. And so I'm no longer as ambitious to achieve certain material things, I guess, as I might have been back then.
Well, looking back, I'm actually working on an autobiography, so I've actually been thinking about some of these things. I was enjoying my life reasonably well, and I was looking ahead to some extent, but I was looking ahead to saying, "Gee, I can learn how to do this, or I can work on this kind of a project or that kind of a project." I didn't have this long-term thing that I wanted to be president or whatever. So I'm wondering if it's just me or if it's something that other people can achieve. And I'm assuming that other people would like to also be content. And that's a goal. But it may be that that's not what they want.
What do you think, Steve?
Excuse me, I was just on mute while we were making some noise around here. I was not talking about my own personal philosophy of life as to whether I'm an optimist or a pessimist or just go along for the ride and smile. I'm taking the world very, very seriously right now, and I keep on thinking about Nazi Germany during the 1930s, and many people, Jews, non-Jews in Germany, simply going along with what was happening. And I really don't know what options they had, but those options are obviously narrowed as we approached the Second World War, and the propaganda machine of the Nazis really came into full view. We castigated those people. I think a lot of us have said, well, they knew what was happening. They were responsible for allowing the Nazis to commit all these atrocities. And then I look at us in this country and other countries in the world too. I mean, certainly the European Union um, is not immune from problems of nationalism. And I say, well, what are we seeing right now? And the only dangers may not be nationalistic governments. It may be pandemics of other kind, of other types. And so you can ask the same question: what do we see? What are we doing now? So yeah, I can say, okay, well, I don't know about the next pandemic. I don't know whether a fungus is going to come and gobble me up or not. So I'll just sort of smile and you'll go about my life. I'm not in that mode personally right now. I'm trying to take all this very seriously and have zero answers. So that's why I'm here right now, to find out, how do I get my personal needs met, so that I'm not just complicit in what's going on in the world that I don't like.
I'm confused a little bit, Steve. I thought you just finished saying that you weren't concerned about your own personal situation, and you're more concerned about other people. And now you're saying you are concerned.
No, I said I was not concerned about my own attitude, whether or not I believe in Eastern religions, or whether I take yoga, or whether I practice meditation, or take drugs, marijuana, for example. I'm not talking about that kind of thing. I'm not talking about. I'm talking about the world as it is, and what I can do to make it better, and what's happening in the world. I think that's a general question. I think I'm not feeling as though my needs are being met as a person. I think I feel isolated much more than I ever did. Of course, a part of it is that I'm now in a wheelchair, but that's not the entire thing. So I guess I've got many more questions than answers.
Oman, what do you think?
Well, listening to this discussion, what I was going to say is that there is what Bob talked about is personal satisfaction. He's contented as a person, but at the same time, you have to see that there are other people of our own age, as you pointed out yourself, that Chuck, that there are you are looking at life with a we have limited number of years. We are not going to be that much out there and fight for things, but we reflect on our own what we can do. But at the same time, what I see is there are younger people who are more enthusiastic. So what I see, my thinking and my observation is that there are older people, even in our own age group, who really contribute to the ideology that we were better off back when, sometime in the past, which is kind of enchanting land, and they try to induce the younger generation to that kind of thinking, who can actually create a revolution and who can be told that you are unhappy because of X, Y, and Z. So what I find is, for example, there are various factors which has led to us being more impatient. And so we cannot take certain things anymore because we can't really wait. We need something now, and I need it right now, and I don't care. So I can go and start fighting in the aeroplane with other people because they don't listen to me. So that kind of dissatisfaction, I think, gets perpetuated by certain individuals who are older, who themselves are not out there fighting on the street. But then this new kind of army can be created, is created, who are able to go out on the street and fight. And what I was going to reflect on is what Steve said, is that does the general population then become complicit in that new wave which is produced, and because the larger groups don't speak up or do not object, and basically become a kind of a mass movement because of our silence. So that complicity is what Nazis came and they took over, because a lot of people did not object. And in that sense, they became complicit. General population may not have cared one way or the other, but because they stayed silent, we got the problem. So what I'm worried about in my little world is that I do see similar things coming throughout the world, actually, in different parts and different ways. Instead of getting us into more democratic mechanisms, but we are more getting into autocratic, theocratic, and oligarchic systems. And one of my Russian friends one day said that, Russians like an authoritative person, a person who takes charge, and Putin is the guy. And I thought that was interesting take on the whole scene. And he says that's why he's in power.
But let me just throw out something, Oman. Isn't the Russian people have always been in that type of, almost always.
Yes.
So they don't necessarily know anything different.
Yeah, that's what the guy was trying to explain to me. He says the Russians like somebody who has that kind of aura, and that's why Putin is in power.
Yeah. What about you, Bob?
Well, but don't forget, guys, now, when we're talking about Russia, Russia is an oligarch right now. It's being run by one of the wealthiest men in the entire world, Putin. The past history of Russia is communism. So it's really hard to compare the traditional Russian system after the Russian Revolution with what's going on in Russia now. They're not the same.
Well, you're missing. It's not whether Putin is rich or poor. It's because Putin is in charge. And makes.
Well, I'm just saying how he's in charge and why he's in charge. Yeah, I agree with that.
Rich because he's in charge. He's not in charge because he's rich. I think that's answers your question. Go look at North Korea. Look at Kim. Kim is not in charge because he's rich. He may be rich. I don't know. But he's in charge. He's the man who says jump, and everyone else, if they speak at all, says how high. Putin the same way. If you look at, I'm trying to look at some other groups. Johnson, although doesn't have nearly as much power, he's trying to set things up so that when he says something, that's the way it's going to happen. Don't want to think. I think it's down to, we talk about revolutions and what you're used to. The French had powerful kings for 1,000 years. In 1789, the powerful king was deposed. Why was he deposed? Because another group, basically the middle class, wanted to have more of a say. They didn't necessarily want to get rid of the king. Some did, obviously, but not all. They just wanted to have more say.
Let me throw this out.
Yeah.
Let me throw this out. If I hear right, Steve, you were saying something about you wanted to feel that you were making things better for people someplace, somewhere. Is that what you were saying?
Well, of course, that's, but not knowing how.
Okay, let me just throw out a possible example. Over in China, we have the Uyghurs. There's over, my understanding, there's over 1 million Uyghurs that are in education camps that the Chinese say. Many people say they're concentration camps. And yeah, we have a lot of American companies. We have the NBA, we have Coca-Cola, many of these companies that are getting products made by these Uyghurs. And we as an American are buying these products or using these services and paying no attention, literally, to what's befallen these people. Possibly to a similar situation with Nazi Germany, that when they were in their concentration camps, what the Nazis were doing, there were people in this country that were aware of that. I don't know how many, but there were people aware. And the American people, we can say how bad the German regular people were because they didn't take action supposedly, but what was the rest of the world doing? And now we have another situation going back to what I was saying about China. Should we be doing something more from the aspect of boycotting products that may be made by some of these companies or the services?
Well, point well taken about what you can do for other countries too. But you know, the world is very complicated, Chuck.
I'm not saying it's not.
Right now, we're identifying China as our public enemy #1. Not that we're involved with a hot war at all, or even a cold war, but things are getting more and more tense. And yet, I'm proud, or well, I'm just going to announce that my niece just got a wonderful job with a Chinese company in New Jersey, in a big pharma company, at least big pharma for China. So the relationship between China and the United States is extraordinarily complicated. China owns a huge amount of real estate in this country. They own an amazingly large fraction of the bonds that our government puts out. It's over my head. It's not within my pay grade to understand what the real relationship is between China and the United States. If someone could explain it to me, I'd be very happy. But we're all, you know, very intertwined. I think that's the bottom line.
In my opinion, we should not be so intertwined with China. That's going to be a major reason why this country is going to have some serious problems in the near future, and probably more so long term, in many, many different ways.
If we were not so intertwined with China, the price of most of our goods would probably triple. Well, because lots of goods are made much more cheaply in China.
So we're allowing us to be able to buy less expensive goods to be the answer. That apparently, we should sacrifice our freedom and our safety because we can get something cheaper. What do you have to say, Bob?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, yes, we are doing that. And by the way, China is benefiting from things made here. When we're intertwined in a relationship that was very hard to break, we are much less likely to do something stupid, like get into a serious war, because the people who are more aware of what's going on tend to say, well, wait a minute, slow down. You can't do that, because when we were having a Cold War with Russia, there was very little interaction between the two. And so there was a very distinct possibility that somebody would screw up.
Well, when Nixon went to China, opened the door to China, that was supposed to lead to what you were alluding to right now.
Yes.
And it's coming back to haunt us, in my opinion.
Well,
Omar, what do you think?
In what way to haunt us? I mean, you may be right. I don't know, but in what way is it haunting us?
Well, they're number one. Well, no, what I'm not sure what number to it, but they've been stealing our intellectual property for years, as far as for military equipment and all kinds of other stuff. And it's not in our benefit to have allowed that to happen.
I think it's more significant to look at it from another viewpoint, and that is that the past 80 years, 70 years, the United States has been the preeminent country in the world and has basically, with some limitations, been able to have things our own way. Now, we don't do it from the point of view of the government. We do it more in point of view of corporations, which, by the way, are no longer American corporations, international corporations, which is very, very significant. But if you look at China, China's doing exactly what we did. It's trying to exert its influence throughout the world, primarily in its own sphere, East Asia. But our biggest problems with China, as far as I can tell, is that they want to be, if not the preeminent power in the world, certainly co-equal with the United States.
Excuse me, they don't want to be anything. They want to be number one. And their objective is to do that probably in the next 20 years or less. Oman, what do you have to say?
Well, that's exactly the point I was going to make, that Chinese are on their path to become number one. But going back to they have been doing this for over several years, and that's what important point I keep on stressing, that United States cannot withdraw from the world. If you withdraw from the world, you are losing the place on the table. You got to be out there so you can exert the influence, make sure the Chinese influence doesn't grow in the world. That's what they are trying to do. The number 2 point to what Steve talked about is we are unfortunately interdependent, and the lot of these not technology, but the materials used for a lot of these chip making or the hardware stuff is actually rare earth. They are in China, so we are dependent on them. And not only that then also you have to recognize that because Chinese market is huge, about what 1.5 billion people in comparison to United States, nearly 300 million people. So you can see the disparity in that. But at the same time, United States has to keep doing things so that it stays preeminent. How can that happen? That happens by making sure we are out there and we are able to generate more and more innovation in the country here so that we can stay up front. But if we give up, they are going to take over. That's the problem. That's why you cannot be looking inward only. You got to be looking outward.
What do you say?
To confirm what Omanan just said, I was reading in the paper this morning, and I was extraordinarily happy to see it, is that the United States and China have come to some tentative agreements on the environment. I think it's more BS probably than substance, but at least the spirit was there that these two countries who are becoming arch competitors are now agreeing to certain joint elements in environmental policy. And I think that's extremely good. And this is due to reaching out and not isolating ourselves from China. Also, I was very happy to read in the paper this morning that the European Union has agreed to line up on our side about Taiwan, and that they are going to be supporting the independence and the democracy in Taiwan. It may not be a huge amount because the European Union is certainly not a major military power, but it's still something, and that is owed to the fact that we have been reaching out to the European Union. So I agree with both Bob and Omanon that you can't be isolated. You can't label somebody else as being bad. And also the laws of international trade must be obeyed. And if some other country can produce a good that is cheaper than you can produce it, you are much better off trading with that country than trying to produce that good yourself.
I don't agree with that, Steve.
That's the law. That's the law of economics.
If we go into an issue with China and they dominate in the pharmaceutical area, we're going to have a major health problem in this country. And going back to what you said about the climate thing with us, I read that earlier today, also yesterday, and I think that's a lot of BS on the aspects that China's going to. They're just doing that to appease us, to make the people feel that way. What do you, Bob? What do you think?
Why would they appease us?
Appease us that oh yeah, we're gonna play along with you, you United States people, but they have very little intention to do anything serious. They're building humongous numbers of coal plants, and have not shown any indication they're going to be slowing down on that.
We're not slowing down on coal mining ourselves either. Look at West Virginia.
Yes, we are. Absolutely, we are. We've been cutting back, and we have intentions of cutting back much further.
Actually,
what do you have to say?
I was just reading an article about coal in China, and some of the older coal mining communities are in real trouble, even though the price of coal has shot up in China because they're very worried about the cold winter coming. So, but what's happening, China is building coal plants, yes, but they're also making major investments in renewable energy. The problem is that their needs for energy are going up to such an extent that they can't rely on just one thing. But their long range appears, obviously, don't know, and number two, things can change, but it appears that they're going to be going more towards renewables because number one, and primarily more than anything else, for health reasons. Remember when they had the Olympics a couple of years ago, they had to shut down Beijing in order to get the air clear enough that people could actually perform. And their population, although they're not necessarily very outspoken, they certainly are concerned about health. And one of the reasons why China was able to survive the pandemic a little better than the United States, they had constant problems and everybody is continuing, but they tend to wear masks. Why do they wear masks? Because the air is so dirty. You have to have something to keep the crap out of your lungs. So,
Oman, what do you have to say? Oman, would you have something to add to that?
No, I don't have anything specific, but in general, I would argue that China has a capability has actually generated capability in multiple types of energy production, and they are trying to dominate even in that because they have cheap labor, and that is possible with them. But at the same time, because of the inundation of the coal dust all over the place and the smog, they are taking precautions and they are trying to become more reliant on alternatives. And because they have no other choice, because the air becomes so dirty. And that's where I think I agree with Bob in that. But at the same time, they cannot right away get away from coal as we can. And India is doing the same thing. They cannot get away, although they have also promised that they will decrease coal use, but I don't know how quickly that is going to be possible, just like here. But at the same time, another point, what I was going to point out is the production of coal here and utilization of coal here has slowly declined, not just because of the climate change, but because of various other factors that we don't talk about.
But that's true, but we still use probably about 20, our energy is probably still produced by about 25% of coal.
Yes.
So we still have quite a ways to go. I just assume see coal go away, but we can't let it go away before we have an alternative that's going to still be able to take care of our heating needs.
Mm-hmm.
What we should be doing is what Obama was promoting when he was president, which is all of the above. I can tell you that when I was a few years ago, I was driving from Las Vegas to Phoenix, and I couldn't believe the number of wind farms there were. In another area, there was solar panels, miles and miles, as far as the eye could see. And that was very productive for providing energy in that part of the country. Other parts, like let's say Massachusetts or Minnesota or something like that, might need other forms to supplement whatever they can get from renewables.
Steve, what do you have to say?
I was just thinking a thought that watching television, you see a number of ads these days put out by the fossil fuel industry saying what good guys they are and how they're all going for renewables, et cetera, et cetera. And sort of sounds like what the tobacco companies were doing back in the 1960s or so. I hope that the fossil fuel industry is genuine, but I'm very, very suspicious that they are not.
Well, the fossil fuel industry, as well as the coal industry, is going to be driven out of business, whether they want to or not. And I think they're going to start compromising a little bit to ease that difficulty. But we can't push it. They can't be pushed out before we have alternatives. And as far as the wind farms go, my understanding is that they're not the big answer. They're very expensive to maintain. And most people know about Texas that they have a large amount of wind farms, and they got some really serious problems this past winter because a lot of them froze up because they didn't insulate them properly. But there's a major problem with the recyclability of those wind component parts also.
But keep in mind, part of the problem in Texas was they deliberately were cut off from the power grid of the rest of the country, where
Texas has their own power grid. They're not tied into the national power grid.
That's my point. But when things went bad in Texas, there was no backup. They just dealt with what they had, which was nothing. Had they been tied into the power grid,
they don't want to be.
I understand that, and you have the freedom not to be, but then you have to accept the fact that you're going to lose out in some things. And one of the things they lost out on was a lot of people froze, some of them to death, and B, the fuel bills when fuel became available were humongous.
Well, they didn't. My understanding is they didn't insulate those wind turbines or whatever properly, and that was a major problem on that.
And their backups for various things were screwed up, so they couldn't pump the natural gas and the oil that they needed to run some of the other plants. They did a whole bunch of things wrong. But one of the key things they did wrong was they didn't have a backup in place. They refused,
Right.
consciously refused to have a backup in place.
They'll be much better this year. I guarantee it.
Well,
What do you have to say, Steve?
they changed nothing. Nothing was changed.
I was just going to comment on this interesting case of electrical transmission lines going across the state of Maine, which the objective of which was to bring very cheap and environmentally friendly hydropower from Canada to Massachusetts, which of course is a major consumer of electricity. And this was defeated, at least temporarily, by the people from Maine who felt like, I'm not entirely sure what the issues were, but probably environmental, that they did not want their pristine forests to be destroyed by major transmission lines. So I think these are the kinds of problems we're having all over the country, where various political jurisdictions conflict, and you have to trade off. Virgin forests with very ugly transmission lines. It's not an easy problem.
Well, I have a question to ask you, and I don't have the answer. I think I know the answer, but I don't know for sure. When Maine voted against transmission lines, I'm sure there was a lot of TV advertising concerning the benefits and problems with doing it. I wonder who paid for that TV advertising. Because for example, right now, the pharmaceutical industry is running ads on local TV, I would imagine around the country, talking about this idea that if you have negotiated prices for pharmaceuticals, everybody's going to die because you won't be able to get the products you want because the government won't pay for it. And we know that to be absolutely not true, but that is what is being promoted. And it's not being promoted by Democrats or even Republicans. It's being promoted by the pharmaceutical industry that doesn't want to have the prices of their products cut.
That's always the battle. Each side is going to present their case.
I mean, that actually answers Chuck's point earlier that we should boycott all the products from China because they are made in a certain way. So does that mean all the TV companies should boycott all those pharmaceutical ads because they conflict with the common good?
What I would like to see is the same thing that they're doing in social media now, where they fact check this stuff. And they have a little thing running on the bottom saying, in the same way as Obamacare did not result in death panels, it's run just like every other insurance world had been run at the time and is still being run, that if you reduce if you negotiate the price of drugs, the net result will be the drugs, at least for Medicare, because everybody else is negotiating. Insurance companies negotiate with the drug companies on their pharmaceuticals. So and all this thing about negotiated prices that Medicare is trying to do is put Medicare on the same footing as every other insurance company. The only reason that it isn't that way was that in order to get enough votes to pass Medicare, they had to agree that Medicare would not negotiate prices. They would just accept whatever prices that the pharmaceuticals companies were going to charge. So,
but unfortunately, while we dicker over these conflicts with big pharma, when the next pandemic comes, are we going to be in a public health position to save the world? And similarly, we have all these conflicts and dickerings with the fossil fuel industry. How are we ever going to get our act together to keep the global temperature so it doesn't rise up to 4 degrees centigrade?
They're not talking about 4 degrees. I think it's 1.5.
That's the goal. But how are we going to keep it to 4 even? They're talking about, that's sort of a rise by the end of the century. And so, we're used to these conflicts, we're used to these arguments, we're used to lobbying, but we can see the results could be absolutely disastrous while Nero fiddles, Rome burns. So on the other hand, we don't want a dictator to tell us we have to go in a certain way, but it seems very difficult for people to cooperate voluntarily for a common good.
I want to go back on what Bob said about the death panels. With Sarah Palin brought that up about death panels, correct?
It was before, but she may have talked to that as well.
I saw an interview a few days ago of 2 women, one woman needing a kidney transplant, and the other younger woman willing to give up one of her kidneys for a transplant, but was told unless they take the vaccine, they will not be allowed to make the transfer. So I'm sorry?
That's because the hospital would not let them into the operating room unless they were considered healthy.
They said they would take all precautions that were needed and would sign any waivers that were needed. They were playing, and they couldn't find, I forget what the story is, as far as whether they could go to another hospital. But their choice was you either take the vaccines or you die.
No, you take the vaccines or you don't get the transplant. Now, it may result,
which means she's dying.
I accept that. But as we were talking a little bit earlier and a couple of months ago, you have the freedom to do pretty much whatever you want as long as it doesn't interfere with someone else's freedom. And choose to do something, you now are saying that either that the other person's freedom doesn't count, or that you will limit what you can do. And
excuse me, people, I have to leave.
Okay.
So it's been a wonderful session. Thank you.
Good to see you, Steve.
Bye-bye.
I want to just close out the aspect that how would you answer the fact if the doctors and nurses at this hospital said they would go ahead and do the procedure regardless if she didn't have the vaccine, but the hospital forbid it being done?
Well, it could be. I don't have the specifics, but it could be that the hospital's insurance company said.
Again, we need some more answers to be able to
understood
this discussion and that.
The other piece to that is the hospital itself may have set up a policy for all employees to get vaccinated, because what happens is, particularly in a hospital setting where you have people going back and forth, they are all liable and they are all susceptible to catching infections. And once you have one person, one doctor, one nurse catches it, everybody else is going to catch it. Particularly given that particular situation about the kidney transplant, it's a it takes a long time to do the operation. So I would imagine there will be a few sets of teams involved. They all could get infected, and that could become a disaster for the whole hospital.
I would say you may be correct. I can't question that, but at the same time, I think you may be a little biased because you work in a hospital setting.
Yes, I am biased, but the key thing is, as Bob pointed out, you have to look for the protection of the other person as well, not just yourself only. I mean, the only thing if they had to do just to get vaccinated, that's a small thing in comparison to basically being alive with a kidney transplant.
There are people that are dying because of these vaccines, because it's not necessarily a great number. I heard on a radio program this afternoon of a man talking about his wife getting a vaccine. I don't know which vaccine it was, but she's totally disabled now.